Thank you very much, Rosita. And I would like to thank Jose Maria for organizing the conference and Giovanni Tarantino for the entire structure of PIMO. What I would like to do in this presentation, and I will basically stick to the 15 minutes, turn off this light, is to sort of not give a specific example, but to try and theorize in terms of paper, going back to the title of the conference, paper, material, and semiotic mobility across the global Mediterranean. I thought for quite a while about the importance of paper as an object, paper as material value for the religious foundations or the Waqf endowments. And I came up with the idea of thinking about the value of the written word as it is enshrined, so between quotes, as it is enshrined in the charter foundation, the endowment foundation of the Waqf in the Ottoman legal system. I should just say one caveat in the very beginning that, of course, it's possible to create an endowment, and I will use a few minutes to talk about what an endowment is. To use an endowment, to create an endowment orally, we don't need paper. It can be created, and you can create an endowment within the Islamic jurisprudential system just by declaring what you are doing before witnesses. But the great majority, 99.9%, the great majority, especially in the Ottoman world, the great majority of endowers used the written word for obvious reasons. So 3 ideas structured this particular presentation. Number 1, this whole idea of enshrinement on paper and the juridical institutionalization of a Waqf endowment within the Ottoman legal system. Very quickly, I'll just explain very quickly the centrality of the endowments in Islamic Ottoman society, knowing, of course, that other religious communities, Christians and Jews and Druze, also used Alawites, also used Waqf. And the same thing, in fact, my observations would apply to those endowments as well. In terms of the value of the written word, the Geniza documents, of course, is the par excellence, the example. So number 1, what's the importance of writing down an endowment on paper and having it registered through the Ottoman legal system? The second is the idea of horizontal mobility of the foundational charter. Horizontal mobility, I mean material, not just ideas, but material mobility of the paper itself, of the foundational charter of the endowment. And the third idea is the vertical mobility, maybe mobility, but vertical mobility of the foundational charter of an endowment. So the first idea, the enshrinement, I put it between quotes because the enshrinement on paper and the juridical institutionalization of a Waqf endowment in the Ottoman legal system. I put that between quotes, that we'll talk about in just a minute, because it is not sacred as such. I mean, it's not the Quran, it is not the Bible, it's not the Talmud, it's not something sacred as such, but yet in the cultural psyche of the society, it does have a sacred character to it, even though there's nothing sacred about a Waqf, nothing sacred about an endowment, which is going to sustain or finance religious instances in the society. There's nothing sacred about it. Nothing is spoken about it in the Quran or in the Bible, but it does have, as I said, this sort of aura around it. Even today, when you say something is Waqf land, it's something special, and it is something special. So I'll go on to what I'm trying to talk about here. Why why use this word or this concept of enshrinement and sacralization of the endowment, especially on paper? So the Waqfiyya, the charter foundation, has a sacred character, nonetheless, to it, because there's a reason. In the jurisprudence, in the jurisprudence, the specialists of Islamic jurisprudence consider, and it's written down in the treatises, consider the text of a foundational charter as equivalent to the text of a hadith. So a hadith, just very quickly, is an action or words of the Prophet Muhammad and or his companions. So if there's a hadith which is not sacred in and of itself, but yet it forms part of the jurisprudence of Islamic law, it's the same thing to extrapolate, as the Islamic jurists do, to extrapolate a endowment charter. The paper itself has something sacred about it. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is the responsibility. So there's something sacred about the paper, the object, the materiality of it. The second thing in this way of this theorization is the responsibility of the endowment administrator to ensure the continued viability of the foundation. And that is considered in the Islamic jurisprudence, his or her, because we have women endowment administrators as well, his or her responsibility is as, I wouldn't use the word sacred, but is as enshrinable maybe as the chain of transmission of a hadith. So that makes sense to people who study the Islamic world, but maybe not to people who are outside of the Islamic world. I can go back to that during the question period. So this is what makes something sacred about the paper itself. When when you have a foundation charter in your hand, you're actually holding something which is not banal. You're holding something which has a sacred quote character to it. So I'll skip over some of this information about the centrality of a Waqf, the centrality of the endowment, but it is framed, the endowment is created by an individual. It is the central tool, the central instrument for the functioning, the social, the religious, political even functioning of society, because before public services were available, things changed at the end of the 19th century with the reform movement in the Ottoman Empire. But before that time, the society had to rely on the endowments for not just religious purposes, but especially for social purposes as well, feeding the poor, housing the orphans, creation and maintenance of the fountains, public water, etc. So there's a whole system of networking and power relations between the individual, man or woman, who creates the foundation and the impact of that particular foundation, always associated with their name in society. Let me get down to, I want to get down to this over here. Excuse me. I published this sort of schema, or this model, about 10 years ago, when I was beginning to go beyond different case studies and try to theorize in relation to the construction of a endowment and the impact and the power of the individual within this particular structure. So I show it to you here because it shows the power of the structure of the endowment itself, the decision-making power of the individual who creates it, and the extreme importance of that paper. You can never lose that charter paper. Well, there are a lot of copies, which I'm going to talk about. You can never, if you lose, I mean, you're really up the creek. If you lose that paper, that material object, which proves that you have created this endowment. So just very quickly, you see that this is it's a lively, it's a dynamic institution. That's why I put arrows on it. It shows that the endower makes the decision of which properties he or she, amongst her own or his own private properties, which properties up to 1/3 he or she will put into the endowment, will give to the endowment as a permanent fixture. Normally, there are exceptions, but normally he or she cannot dissolve the foundation once it's created. So the decision is to give the property to the endowment. This property is built property. It's also agricultural property. It can also be sums of money. It can be some other things as well. But they give that property as a permanent action. Those properties are going to generate revenue, and all of this is very, very detailed in terms of the administration within the Islamic jurisprudence and within the state administrative law as well. And so the endower then will choose who or which beneficiaries, who are the people or which institutions in the society will receive the revenues. This is minutely detailed within the endowment charter, within that paper, within that object. And last of all, so you have the revenue generating assets, you have the beneficiaries, which can, not always, can be part of the family of the founder, can be anyone else, can also be, there's complete freedom of, it's not a hereditary structure, so it's complete freedom of choice of the beneficiaries who are going to receive the revenues, money, or in nature, in kind of the revenues. And in the middle of this triangle, you see the word management, which also the endower will choose the person, nominatively choose the person who will administer, who will manage the Waqf. And that's a very important position, because you have, that person will have privy to, in the case of a large endowment, lots of money, lots of revenue, lots of capital, lots of properties, which will be rented out in order to generate the revenue. So I just wanted to, I can go back, but I just wanted to show you very quickly this schema, because it does represent an extremely powerful instrument in Islamic society. And when I say Islamic society, I mean the space, southern, eastern part, and the Balkan area also of the former Ottoman Empire and during the Ottoman Empire. This is a structure used by all the religious communities within that space. That's just okay. So now I would like to go down to getting back to the whole focus of this conference. The horizontal mobility of the object, of the paper, of the endowment charter. I'm sorry, I didn't put an endowment charter. I should have done that, an endowment charter in this PowerPoint, because some of them, especially the large sultanic endowments, but not just, are very, very fancy. They have beautiful gold lettering. They have sometimes designs. I mean, it's a beautiful, it can be a very beautiful object, and sometimes with gold letters. It can be a very beautiful object, going back to, of course, even pre-Ottoman times as well. So the object itself is worthy of being studied, and I myself do not study the charter as an object itself. So there's art historians or historians of paper historians who study that. But I study it as a historian. What is the impact on society of this horizontal mobility of paper, which means that the original endowment charter. So in this charter, without going into detail, there's the name of the endower, the genealogy going back at least 2, sometimes 3 generations of the endower, man or woman, all of the very, very specific details concerning the properties that he or she feeds or gives to the Waqf, to his or her foundation. The names, everything is very carefully defined. The names of the beneficiaries, the names of the administrators. All of this information is in the foundational charter, the original. It's a paper document, as I mentioned, which is presented. It's the court scribe, usually, who writes it up. It's presented, it's registered, and it's archived in the local court of the Ottoman tribunal system. So all across North Africa, until excluding Morocco, all the Near East going towards Iran, so all of Iraq, all of Anatolia, and all of the Balkans, and Greece until 1821, they had this system. And the system, of course, some of it anyway, existed after the fall of the Ottoman Empire in some of the Balkan states, national states that were created, and at the end of the Ottoman Empire as well. It still continues to exist in the colonial period. So anyway, you have this one paper document, and then you have automatically 3 copies, 3 paper copies. So the scribes really did a great business. So the scribes in the court system produced 3 copies of at least 2 copies, usually 3, of the original charter document, and they are certified according to a very, how would you say, institutionalized system, using the same words over and over with court sanctioned witnesses. So it's a very heavy process. It's not just any old thing that happens, it's a heavy process. So there's the original paper document. There are 2 or 3 copies, court certified copies, which one is in the court records of the tribunal, of the court, where the document was registered. Another copy is kept within the family, or is kept by the endower and within the endower's family. And another copy is kept by the beneficiaries who are going to receive revenues from this Waqf, from this endowment. In the case, let me just go on here. In the case of a very large endowment, it's not the case with small ones, but sometimes it is if there's a dispute. But in the case of large endowments with valuable real estate property, for example, with shops, restaurants, and things like that, in dense commercial areas, urban souks, then a court-certified paper copy of the endowment charter is sent to the court records, sent to the archives in Istanbul. So, for example, if a researcher is studying an endowment, he or she has access to, if you're lucky, has access to 2 or 3 or 4 copies of the same endowment. And very often people make mistakes. We all do when we write, even on the computer, we have to go back and correct, but the scribes will make mistakes when they copy, even though it's court certified, they will make mistakes. And so it's interesting for the researcher to see those mistakes which happen. The point is that the paper itself is very valuable, and it's probably one of the most valuable things in an Ottoman house, which has an endowment. You have your gold, your jewelry, your other things of value, and you have usually a locked box where the endowment charter or the copy of the endowment charter is kept. So it's really an object of great value. And of course, as I mentioned, some of it is extremely beautiful. So it's horizontal mobility because all of these copies are made at the same time. They're all made within a few days. They're all made at the same time. It's horizontal, going from then the family to the beneficiaries, a copy to Istanbul, a copy in the local court system, in the local court. It's also vertical. It's also vertical in the sense, this Waqfiyya, or the endowment charter, or the copies, it's also vertical in the sense that an endowment will last very often for generations. because these endowments are made to last forever. Of course, nothing's forever, but this word forever, we find it all throughout the documents, is that once you create an endowment, you're removing that 1/3 of property from your patrimony, from your heritage. You're creating, this power instrument with the foundation, with the generation. And so as it's thought to be for, let's say, for a long time anyway, forever, it goes through generations, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations. Sometimes it goes through centuries. For example, there are several Waqf in Jerusalem. It's very well known, the Haseki Sultan Waqf. Anybody who studies Waqf knows that one. And it continues to exist, in fact, today. And it was founded at the sort of the mid 16th century. So it's been going on for some 4 centuries or more. And whenever there is a litigation, whenever there is a problem, all those documents, all the paper documents, I suppose today it's all on digitalized, but up until some time ago, all of those papers had to be taken out of their boxes, brought to the court, shown, that paper object is shown, and if there's a problem with a conflict, for example, about a property which was given to the foundation 3 generations ago, it can still be a source of litigation, a source of conflict. And it's the paper which is going to be the defining element on which the judge is going to base his decision. So it's vertical because it goes through then a number of different generations. The administrator of as I mentioned, the administrator of the endowment also has a copy. And if we go some 50 or 70 or 100 years after the creation of the endowment, that charter, that endowment charter, the Waqfiyya, is still held in the position of the administrator, or the successors, of course, of the administrator, if we go on some 50 or so years afterwards. So the paper object is very important. I mentioned that already. That being said, to stick within my 15 minutes, that being said, I would just like to go back then to the beginning of these several thoughts about the importance of the idea of this conference, the material mobility of the enshrined, I should put that between quotes, of the enshrined foundational document of an endower. So this material mobility is very important, or it's even I would say in a sense, it is the object which certifies the creation of the endowment and the functioning of it down through the different generations. This material mobility of paper, of the paper document, is also very important in a horizontal manner, as I mentioned, through the creation of the endowment, the court certified documents, which are spread out. It's not just kept in the endower's home, as I mentioned, it's spread out. The beneficiaries have copies, especially the administrator, and also the court, the local court, Istanbul, if it's an important endowment, and the importance of paper. Excuse me, should I put horizontal, vertical? Oh, I didn't put that in the conclusion. Oh. And also the vertical importance of the paper itself, which is the proof that this endowment was created and the details on which it functions. And today, as I mentioned, today in the archives, the value of the written word, is primordial. My last example, just to take another 2 more minutes on this, is when this whole system of endowments, the Islamic endowments, which are called Waqf, these endowments, when they were abrogated, when they were dismantled during the colonial period in Algeria, Tunisia, but also in Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, etc., during the colonial period, or the very post-colonial period in Syria in 1949, for example, Egypt 1952. When they were abrogated, everything was based on the original court registered endowment charter. So all those papers, and if by malchance the family of a endower no longer found the paper, it became a real problem because they could not prove that their ancestor had created an endowment. They had to go to the court's archives and try to locate a copy. They could often do it, but sometimes it was impossible. So the importance of paper and its mobility throughout the ages, throughout the generations, is a primordial piece of testimony, a primordial piece of information for the endowments. So I will stop there, and thank you very much for your time.